Alrighty, so this session is for the budget reviewers for the budget process, and that's pretty much in the same two areas as the budget owners. That would be in Google Drive and in Colleague. So in Google Drive, there is a PT salary requests sheet to look at and kind of review what the budget owners input and look at the totals, make sure they match up in Colleague with their respective object line items. And then if you do make any changes, you'll have to update those totals in Colleague. So then when we go over to Colleague, we'll be using RWLI to use to look at the different budgets and kind of review the justification notes and the different totals. And then after that, we will go over to DWSR and run the report of the numbers for the fiscal year for all the budgets you have. So as a little note, the due date for the budget reviewers is January 31st. So the budget owners should be done with their inputting by January 15th, 2021. So then the budget reviewers have about 2 weeks until January 31st, 2021 to review them. And then it goes up to the next level. So we are going to share my screen and we're going to take a look at Google Drive to find that folder with the PT salary requests. Alrighty, so I am in my Gmail right now. So what I like to do with Google Drive is access it through my email so I know I'm using the right account. So I just click on the Google Apps icon up here, the waffle icon, and click on Drive. And it opens up in a new tab. And if you've been in Google Drive before, this should be pretty self-explanatory because the folder has been shared with you. It's in the Shared With Me section. If you haven't been in Google Drive, usually the My Drive section is just all the stuff that you have and that you've created or you've moved from the Shared With Me section, like this little Brightspace training thing has a little funky icon because I moved it. But usually this particular folder will be in the Shared With Me section. So I'm going to click on that along the left. And usually the Shared With Me section is sorted by the share date. So it should look something like this, where all of the most recent things are at the top. So for me, the shared folder is right at the top because it was shared with me within the last week. Now for you, it might have been shared with you at the end of November 30th, I think maybe was the beginning of all this, so that you should see it around like the November 30th line or early December. But what I like to tell people to find it even quicker than that is to click on this little indicator of the sorting. So in my case right now, it's share date. I'll zoom in a little bit. And if I click on share date, I can change that to name, and that puts all of the folders at the top. So then I can look for a folder that looks like it should be for budgeting. Usually it'll have a department number and a name. In my case, it just has a department name, but I know that this is the right one. You may see a budget number, like I said, a department number rather, and a department name, so it's a little more identifiable. The thing I like to do to make sure that it is the right folder, just to double check, is use this little eye icon for details in Google Drive. It's on the far right of your Google Drive, and sometimes it may be collapsed, but if you click on it, it opens up details for whatever is highlighted in blue on the left. So in this case, I have the fiscal icon, the fiscal folder highlighted. So now it's showing me details such as the owner, which is budget 2022. So contrast that with the other folder I have in here for budgeting, and I can see that the owner for this one is 2019, so I know that's an old folder. So if I click on a folder that I think is the right one, I can click on that little I for details, and then you can see who has access to it, but also who owns it. So in this case, it should be budget 2022. So then once you think you're in the right folder, just by verifying here in the details pane, you can double click on it to open. And you should see, if you oversee a lot of budgets, you may see additional subfolders in here that you can double click into and see the PT salary requests for each one. But in my case, I just have the one. Really, you'll be looking for this PT salary requests form that you can just double click on and it will open. It acts as a Google sheet, or it acts as a spreadsheet because it is a Google sheet. And it does have 3 tabs that should be full of information depending on the department you're looking at. So not every department's going to have adjunct and overload. Like this is the fiscal department, they're probably not going to have adjuncts. Seasonal student, that applies to student workers, but not grad assistants. And then OT is for overtime. So just make sure to check every tab to make sure that whatever information is there is accurate. So if you're in a department that doesn't have adjuncts, but you see something in here for adjuncts, then maybe you want to adjust that and either change the type to what it actually is or get rid of that request altogether. But essentially, some things to keep in mind when you're reviewing these Google Sheets is the object numbers at the top. They apply to the different tabs and they change for each tab. You'll also see when we get into colleague and actually see these line items that they are described more in detail. So you will see like adjunct salary or something like that. It will be kind of displayed. But it's important to keep those object numbers in mind. We also have our semesters here that these requests apply to. So everything from summer 2, 2021 to summer 1, 2022. There's also going to be some comments and justifications. I didn't fill this out because it's really not my place to fill it out. This isn't my budget. But the comments and justifications, they should have some text in them from your budget owners. So they should be justifying why they are requesting this amount of adjuncts or this amount of overloads. And same with each of their tab, they all have comments and justifications. You want to make sure that you're checking them and seeing why they're requesting this money. So pretty much you just want to make sure everything's filled out to its fullest potential, your department names, your department numbers. There's also these drop downs. So if something doesn't seem quite right, like the semester is a little off, you can always change them here. Same with the type for this particular tab. We have adjuncts, overload, summer, bonus, and other. So if there's something marked other in the type column, maybe there's justifications on that. So you just kind of want to keep an eye on things and make sure everything makes sense together. Another thing you want to keep in mind is this total request cell where it has the total of everything requested in that tab. If you do end up changing like the total for any of these lines, they will add up automatically in the total request cell, so you don't have to worry about it. But if you do change a number, obviously this cell will change and you'll have to change that number in the corresponding line in colleague. You'll probably be able to put the pages side by side so you can kind of double check. But if you do change this total request to a different number, you do want to make sure that that reflects in colleague as well, just to keep everything cohesive. So essentially, what I've talked about in this adjunct and overload tab is what you'll do for all of the others. So if you click over to seasonal student, you'll see that there are other object numbers to keep in mind. Another reminder that this is not for grad assistants. Make sure that the department name and number is all filled out. I'm sure it will be though. And then here's another case where we have some drop downs to change the different types of employees, whether that's seasonal, work study, tutor, note taker, or something else. And these are all kind of formulaed. They are tied to a formula in this total column. So whatever you change here, whether that's the number of employees or the rate they're being paid at, hours, weeks, what have you, they'll all add up here in this total cell, and then all of those rows will add up into the total request at the bottom. And just like with that first tab, if you do change anything, make sure to refer to the colleague RWLI form and make sure you change the number there as well. And I'll show you what I mean by that when we get to that step. This employee name column isn't completely required because maybe they don't know who's going to fulfill that position. But if they do, that's when they'll put the name in. So if you see that blank, it could just be because that person isn't hired yet and they're just requesting that position, or maybe it's like a stock work study position. They don't know who will fill it, but they know it'll be a student. And again, comments and justifications, just make sure that they are filled out so that everything that is requested is being justified. And then finally, the overtime tab, we have, again, another object number. So this one's 51033. Department name and department number, as we've seen. This one has a very similar setup to the seasonal student tab. So we have a position title and the number of employees that will hold that title. We have some rates, hours, and weeks as well. And those, again, are tied to a formula in the total column, and that adds up to the total request. And if you make changes, just make sure you change it in the 51033 line in colleague. Same with the employee name as it was in the seasonal student tab. There may be a name here. If it's blank, it's probably because they're not sure yet who will fulfill that position. And then the comments and justifications is just, make sure that those are correct. The employee name here will actually probably be more specific because this is for overtime. So that's typically for existing employees, I would imagine. But, just things to keep in mind. This does automatically save whenever you change anything. So if you do end up changing the total request to a certain number, it will automatically save. And because this is a Google Sheet and already owned by the Budget 2022 account, it will automatically be shared with them. So you don't have to do anything additional once you've reviewed this. Whatever state you leave it in by January 31st is the state that it will be accepted in. At least that's how I imagine it will happen. So it'll be automatically saved and shared. You do not have to do anything additional to this Google Sheet once it is done. So that's kind of nice. Ross, do you have any questions about anything so far or no? Good. Okay. So the next step then would be to go to colleague and make sure that everything is okay over there. So you've probably been in colleague before, but if you haven't, the easiest way to get there is through the Marywood homepage. So I'm going to click on through to the Marywood homepage. And on the bottom, we have the Tech Help link. So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. It's at the gray bar at the bottom, which is always anchored to any page on the Marywood website. So wherever you are, whether that's directories or in the schedule of classes, you'll see it probably. So you click on Tech Help, and it opens up our nifty little help desk page where you can submit a ticket at the bottom. So if you have any questions or things are going wrong, it's always best to submit a ticket because then I'll definitely see it. So you would just click on that and sign in with your username and password. But that's really only if you have any questions. What you do want to do to access Colleague is click on Useful Links on the left. And then the first link you see here is for Colleague Production, which is actually the right link. In the documentation, I have it as Production 5.13, but they've updated it a little bit since. It's the same thing though. Just make sure that it says Preferred-Production. So make sure it's that first link. We do have an older version, but that is really just in case the new one breaks for whatever reason. And that is only for Internet Explorer. So we really want to use the new one because you can use any browser with that you like. There are no restrictions. And when you open it up, it should have this nice dark green background, which indicates that you are in the right place. All of the other links that say preferred are all test servers, and they're only as current as the date that they show on the link. So those would be like your March 2020s, November 2019. So make sure that it's green in the background and says production environment at the top. Then you'll know you're in the right place. And if you like, you can bookmark it from here. There's a little star at the top in the address bar that you can just click and add to your bookmark so you don't have to go to the useful links page. But that's completely optional. You do not have to do that. With Colleague, though, you do have to sign in with your portal information. So that would be either your first part of your email if you are newer, or if you've been here, I think longer than 5 years, maybe it'll be, maybe a little less than that. It'll be those 4 letters and 2 numbers like I'm showing here. But whatever you use to sign into the portal or your PC in your office, that's what you use here as well. So I'll click Login. And sometimes it takes a little bit. Just be patient. When you see loading favorites, that's when you know you're in the home stretch and it's almost ready. So now we're in. The first thing you see is a confidentiality statement, so just click OK. If you've ever been in Colleague before, you'll know that happens every time. And this is the page you see whenever you log into Colleague. So we have to start searching for something in order for data to show up. So what we're going to do is actually go straight up to the form search. So you want to make sure that page is clicked. If this person icon is clicked, that means we're searching for a person, which doesn't really apply to the budget process. So make sure that search for a form is highlighted and the text in the search bar says search for a form. And then what we're going to do is look up RWLI. I have to do an additional step real quick just because I am not a direct budget owner, so you can just ignore me for a second if it moves fast. Just for some context, this step is for aliases who are then on the same level as a budget owner. They kind of do the inputting for the budget owners that they're assigned to. So every time an alias has to come into Colleague to do budget inputting, they have to go to BAAS, but this is not something you have to worry about. So now, let's pretend that we're in here for the first time and we're ready to look at RWLI to review the budget numbers. So we'll type RWLI up in the form search, click the Enter key or the magnifying glass, whichever you prefer. And then the first thing it should ask you is about a budget ID lookup. And every time it asks you that, whether you're in RWLI or DWSR for the report, it's going to be FY22. So just 2 letters, FY, and 2 numbers, 22. And then once you have that typed in, you just click OK, and you'll get a list of your budgets that you want to look at. So it may be slightly overwhelming, but you kind of just start wherever you like, double click on the budget you want to open, and it will open up in RWLI. So I'm going to open up this first one just by double clicking. And the first thing you will see is 4 separate columns, each very important in their display. So the first column we have is description, where it shows the complete budget number for that line. So our first budget number is 51032. Well, that's the object number, and it refers to seasonal part-time. So that's where you kind of pull from your PT salary requests page up here and get your seasonal, get that total request, and then enter it in Colleague. So that is kind of where that applies. And then as you go down, you'll see there's only 5 of these rows. So there are multiple pages, as you could imagine. There's not only 5 rows in your budget. So if you click on this first description field, or any field really, you will see this page icon or page navigation show up at the top. So you can use the left and right arrow buttons to kind of navigate through this budget. You can use this very far right icon to go to the very last page. Likewise, with the first page icon, you can go straight to the first page. But remember that you do have to click into a field in order to see that page navigator. So if you don't see it at first, just kind of click, and then you will see it. So that's the first column, the description column, with your description of each line item and the numbers, of course. And pay special attention to those object numbers in response or in reference to your PT salary requests. So that second column then is the basic amount column, which just refers to the requests for fiscal year 2022. So this is what the budget owners have been working on. It's a white field, which means that you can edit it. So that means that if you do not agree with the number that is there, or you would like to adjust it a little bit, you can just click on any of these white fields and just type in a number that you would rather, or you believe is more accurate. So that's pretty much the basic amount column. You kind of just look at it, see the number, and then you can change it if you like. There are justification notes attached to that, but I will get to that in a second. So then the third column is actually a display of a previous fiscal year. So typically the default it goes to is C1, which refers to fiscal year 2018. So at that point, it's a couple years back. You can still see the numbers that were requested in that year, but what I usually prefer is to change this by clicking on the little drop down and changing it to C3, because that refers to the current fiscal year. So we can see this year that's happening right now, what numbers were requested, and then you can kind of just either base it off that or kind of get a better idea of what was requested over the past 2 years, because you can see in this fourth column that this is actually 2019. So you can kind of see over the past 2 years how the requests have changed, and maybe you want to keep it relatively the same, or it's just good for reference. Now, what I'm going to do is kind of show you how to view the justification notes for each of these basic amount fields, because for every number that is not a 0, they should be justifying the amounts. So you should have just some justification notes to look at. So I believe one of the things I put a justification note on was on page 4 or 5. There it is. And you can tell something has a justification note by this little J letter in the first very small yellow field. So I can tell immediately that I have a justification note there because I have a J. So what that means is that I can view the justification note pretty easily by clicking on this detail button to the right of the basic amount column. So the detail button is just a white page icon that shows up across colleagues, so it's pretty standard. And what it does, in this case, it shows you a list of relative or relevant forms that you can open based on the data that you clicked the detail button next to, if that makes sense. So in this case, since we're looking at justification notes, it's this BJNS, and this is also in the documentation if you wanted to refresh. So you can double click on this, and it opens up the justification notes for that specific column, or line rather. So you can tell there's a detail button next to every single field in the basic amount column. So whatever detail button you click for the justification notes refers to the cell that you're clicking next to. And that kind of reminds you here in BJNS. So it tells you what object number we're actually looking at here, which is 53,510. And then it's telling us what number we've requested, so we know what amount of money we're asking for, and it tells us the description of the actual line. So remember what you're actually referring to. So in the justification notes area, you can see the text in these 5 lines. So it kind of awkwardly splits between the 5 lines. And sometimes this is enough, but if it seems like it cuts off oddly on line 5, it may be the case where there are more pages. So in that case, if you click on one of these justification notes cells, you'll see the page navigator pop up again. So if there are multiple pages, you will see like 1 of 2 or 1 of 3. But the easier way to see the entire justification notes is to click on the detail button once more to the right of the first line. And that just opens up the entire text box where the budget owners and aliases have actually typed in the justification notes. So you can see how they justified what they requested. If you requested a different amount and you would like to justify that, you can kind of just come in here and add an addendum if you like, or you can do whatever you need to justify your new amount. And if you did end up changing the justification notes, you can just click Save, and it brings you back to the form. And then you'll just have to save one more time in order to save your current justification notes form and then return to RWLI. So you just want to click the Save button instead of Save All, because it'll give you the option to update, and then it will bring you back to the previous form. Whereas if you clicked Save All, it would just kind of save everything, but then close it too. So you'd have to go back into RWLI, which is kind of a pain. So if you want to stay in the RWLI form, but then close the BJNS form, just make sure to click Save, Update, and then it will bring you back here. So that's pretty much how you check justification notes. You'll know that there is one if there's a J in that little yellow box, and then you can click on the detail button to the right of the amount, and it will show you the justification notes for that line. So really not too bad. And you pretty much just go through and rinse and repeat with all the budgets. So you'll pretty much be doing a very repetitive motion by clicking into RWLI, finding a budget you want to review, clicking through the pages, viewing justification notes, and then if you did make changes, adjust them accordingly, and when you're done, you just click Save. And that is how you pretty much submit those numbers as well. It's not like Google Drive where it automatically saves. You do have to click a Save button, but once you click Save and Update, it is saved, so you don't have to worry too much about that. Are there any questions at all? Or all right, cool. So I'm going to save this up because say I'm done reviewing this budget. I can click Save, and update. If you wanted to keep looking at budgets, you can go right back in and click FY22, click OK, and then select a new budget. So you can keep going around and around and around until you're done. But if you are actually finished for the time being, or you are finished completely, you can click on Finish and it will bring you back to the home page. So this is where I would suggest doing DWSR to run like a report of all the numbers that have been inputted in RWLI. So you'll have a nice report of numbers for all of your budgets, plus you can have justification notes printed as well. So they will be like indented under their relevant object items, and you'll be able to view those. You can save it as a PDF, you can print it out if you like, and it's good to have, but also good to have for next year when you're looking to do this again. So it's very nice. And if you are wondering if you could view last year's justification notes, you can contact Carolyn on that, unless someone had DWSR saved to their computer from last year. But that's not usually the case. So you can contact Carolyn or the Budget 2022 account about that. But all that to say, to locate the DWSR report in Colleague, you would just click or type DWSR in the form search up here, click on our magnifying glass, and it'll process a little bit. And just like with RWLI, it will ask for the budget ID lookup, and that will be FY22, just as it was before. So once that comes up, then we will input that. Okay, this is promising. There we go. So budget ID lookup FY22, click OK. And this is where it'll start pulling all your budgets. So this might take a little bit depending on how many you have. And it will list them all in these white fields on the left, and all the descriptions of those budgets will be on the right in the yellow fields. And it kind of just lists them all for you, and you can choose to include all of them in your report or only some of them. So you may see initially that it is blank, and that may not seem correct. So what you're going to have to do is click on this first field, the first white field, and it'll populate all of them. For some reason, it kind of waits for you to interact with the report before it actually populates the budgets, but I don't question it. So we have 10 items here, and I can see just by clicking on that first cell that I have 5 more pages, or 4 more pages for a total of 5. So that's a lot of budgets. So in the case that you don't want to include some budgets, for whatever reason that may be, you can click on the number of that budget. So if I wanted to get rid of the maybe the private gifts one for some reason, I can click on number 6 because that corresponds with the private gifts budget line here. Click on number 6, and if I want to take it out of my report, I just click delete and then whole group. And this is in the documentation as well, but you'll click delete and then whole group. And that whole line just goes away and it all moves up. So now private grants is number 6. So you can keep deleting and deleting and deleting to only get the reports or budgets that you like. But if you have so many that it fills 5 pages on Colleague, I would probably say to just run all of them anyway. And then when you get to the PDF, you can always take pages out of PDFs. It page breaks between each budget, so it makes it easy to separate. So I would say if you don't want to waste the time deleting certain budgets from the report, just keep them all in and either ignore the pages of the budgets you don't want to see, or you can just kind of split the PDF and get rid of those pages. So this is the first page of our report. We have all the budgets that we want to include in the report. So the next thing to do is click Save. And this progresses us through the report. There are about 2 other pages to go through, and they have very minimal changes. So just kind of pay attention to make sure which details to include. And again, this is in the documentation, so in case you forget a tiny detail, you can always watch this recording back, or you can look at the documentation. But to progress to the next page, we do the Save button like I did, and then Update. And it brings us to page 2. And on this page, the only thing to change is this output device at the very top. It defaults to printer spooler, but there's no printer connected to Colleague. through your computer. So you want to click this drop down and change it to hold/browse file output. So we want to change it to the H option. And this just means that you can save it once it's generated. So it's actually a better option than just printing it directly from Colleague, which we can't even do. So make sure that you click H here so that you can download it and then print it out if you like. So we only change the output device, and we can click Save to continue forward and Update to update our settings. Though, I just realized we didn't do something. So I'm going to have to cancel this. The all-important justification notes, I just didn't include them. So I'm going to cancel. I won't go over the details so much again, but I'm going to go back in and do FY22 and show you the pretty much most important part of this whole thing that I totally forgot to show you. So once we click on this field to generate all our budgets, sure, we want to keep them in. You want to scroll down, which I didn't do. So make sure you scroll down until you see these 4 options. So we have indicate changes, print only changes, print justification notes, and print active scenarios. So really the only one I've ever changed is this justification notes, and it always defaults to no matter how many times you've run DWSR. So you're going to want to click on that cell and change it to Y for yes. Click out of the cell if you like, and then it puts yes in that box. So you know that you're going to get the justification notes. And if you mess up like I just did, you can run DWSR as many times as you want. It's not like a one and done. So don't worry, if you forgot to print them out the first time, you can always run it again. So now that we have our budgets and we have the justification notes, we can then truly go on to page 2. And this time we will only change the output device to hold browse file output, and then click save and go back to where we were before. So on this final page 3, do not change anything. Just leave it as it is and click save and then update once more. So then you get this little progress page. It doesn't really show you progress. It kind of just finishes. So if you have this box checked to close automatically when complete, this box will just close as soon as the report is done, and then you'll see the report preview. So you don't have to click finish. I actually don't think it'll let you until it's done processing. But since I have this box checked, it'll close as soon as it's finished. And it may take a minute or so just based on how many budgets you have. It needs to pull all those numbers and justification notes. So you may be here for a minute or so. But once it is done, it will close. And there we are. Here's our little report preview. We have pretty much all the details that you could ever want, like the time and date that this was run, what fiscal year we're talking about, who the budget ID officer is if you are an alias, but since we're talking budget reviewers, we are looking at the different budget names here. So like I said, there's a page break for every budget. So if you have a whole bunch of budgets, they're all going to get their own page. So this one, for example, is the fiscal services one, which I did do some test justification notes in. So if I kind of scroll past these numbers, you can see the 2 fields that I did justification notes for. So for this line, particularly for the telephone, I have my justification note right here. And then same for the department office supply, I have another one right here. So for every item that has a justification note attached to it, it will just indent right underneath so you can see it. And then there's a nice little space in between that and the other items so that it's easy to read. You can tell where the justification note belongs, and it's kind of easy to view. Now to go on to the next page, just so I can show you the page break, if I click on this little right icon, now it's showing grants. So page 2 is grants. Page 3 is dining. So it breaks it up. And I believe the dining one is actually 2 pages. And even though this is maybe only half a page, if you click the next, there's another one that is another half a page, and then another one. So it kind of splits them up pretty nicely so that it's easy to review. And then what you're going to do is click Export PDF. So you don't want to click Save As because that actually generates an HTML file, which you can then open in a browser, which I just I don't think that's as good as a PDF file. Because then you can save this to your Google Drive or to your shared drive, your network folder, whatever you want to do. So if you click Export PDF, it does give you some options. If you'd like to keep the text as Courier New, you can do that, but there's two other options if you want to change it. You can change the font size if you think it's too small, and then the landscape or portrait orientation, and then the paper size. So you can kind of customize it to how you want to view it, but I usually keep it on these settings. And then click Create PDF. It'll automatically generate a download button for you. So you just click download. And if you have Chrome, it goes straight down to the bottom. And if you're using Firefox, it usually goes up to the little arrow icon up here. You just click on the PDF to open it up. And there is your DWSR report. Mine's a little funky with the margins here, but it does the job. So it's super easy to run that. Like I said, you can run it as many times as you like. So if things keep changing before January 31st, you can totally keep running it. Just make sure that you know which one is the most recent and up-to-date one, though I'm sure this date and time would be very helpful for that. So that's pretty much the reviewing process. Is just kind of looking in Google Drive for that PT salary requests and do that for all your departments. And then you go into Colleague and do RWLI, review those numbers and the justification notes, and then run DWSR, the detail worksheet report, to get a full report of all the numbers as they are saved in RWLI and all the justification notes as they are saved. So a three-step, threefold process. It's not too bad. And again, that is due January 31st. So do we have any questions about that? We good? All right. Well, that was short and simple. I'm going to stop sharing the screen, but that's pretty much it for this recording. So if you're watching this, I hope it was easy. And if you have any questions, definitely contact the help desk. You can send them an email and it automatically generates a ticket. So then I will definitely see it. And if it ends up being something that Carolyn can help with, I'll reach out to her. But feel free to use me as a messenger. I'm happy to do that. So good luck with your budgeting.